All right. So, I mean, first and foremost, could you just give me a quick introduction, a brief overview about what is Noloco.io? I mean, I know, but a lot of viewers of the channel and of course your, followers, subscribers, clients, possible clients, they probably don't know fully what Noloco is and what are the core functionalities. So, and I guess, what do you feel sets Noloco apart?
Sure, yeah. So Noloco to me is a powerful no-code app builder. So we allow small, medium-sized businesses or small teams and larger businesses to build the custom tools that they need, the custom apps. And these are typically client portals, internal tools like project management, inventory management, or custom CRMs, or more often than not, a hybrid of all kind of 3 or 4 of those things, right? And what sets us apart is usually our kind of flexibility and the power of our platform. We strive for power through simplicity. So we allow you to do the most possible things, because at the end of the day, the worst case scenario for adoption of a no-code tool is kind of you hitting a roadblock and you end up kind of saying, well, actually, no, I need to go back and choose another platform. So we strive to allow you to do the most possible things without kind of overcomplicating the interface, right? So but our biggest challenge is always kind of walking that line of complex functionality and then easy to use adaptability.
Okay. All right. I see. And kind of building on that, let's kind of go back a little bit. What is the origin story of Noloco? What was the inspiration behind building Noloco? You were part of Y Combinator, but why Noloco? Why that particular direction?
Yeah, great question. So I'm a software engineer. I used to work as a front-end software engineer at HubSpot. HubSpot, as probably everybody knows, is a massive company at this point with hundreds of engineers, and they have dedicated resources to have a whole team dedicated to just the front-end engineering. By that I mean they have a team that design all of the little bits of components that say the design team come up with. So if the design team design a button, the front-end engineering team designed that button in code, and then as a front-end developer, you just kind of pick it off the shelf and implement it. So it becomes a lot like no-code in the sense that you're not designing anything anymore. You're just picking the data or the components off the shelf and then wiring the data around them with code, obviously. And then I kind of took a step back and realized that the designers aren't doing a huge amount either, because there's a design team that's designed these. And the designers at HubSpot would hate me, but there's a design team at HubSpot too, right? And they've the one that's designed all these hundreds of components. And I realized that the designer on our team pretty much didn't have a choice. If the application needed the data to be presented in a table, well, they pretty much just had to use the table. And if one of the columns in that table was a kind of an option field, like maybe a survey score, or kind of a status pending or update or kind of active, then they would, there'd be a drop down for that in the filter. It would look like a badge. The design of all of these individual elements was actually dictated by the type of data that it was. So I kind of had this in my mind the whole time. And then I moved to working at a smaller startup, Inscribe, where we just had to do everything ourselves. And I no longer had this design team, and I no longer had this front-end engineering team. And, I wasn't looking at it through a product lens, but from our internal tools perspective, I realized that we were using Retool a lot. And a Retool obviously is a low-code application developer, and it basically does half of what I described, where you have off-the-shelf components that you can drag and drop, and then you as an engineer wire all the data into it. But I kind of reflected on, hey, there's a world where the application you're designing is completely controlled by the type of data that you need to work with, and that you can actually just boil it all down to a few configurable options. So if you're working with a status field, it'll probably be a drop down. Maybe they're colored options, maybe it's a radio picker, and if you want to filter that, well, you pretty much know it's going to be a drop down with those options. If it's a text field, you're going to get a text box as a filter, and you're going to display that as text, and maybe you want to choose to wait and so on. But there's not that many options that you need, and you don't need to start with a blank canvas every time. So between those two things, we saw the opportunity.
Sorry to interrupt you. At this point, Like when you maybe starting from HubSpot or when you're working on the smaller startup, did you have a sense of low code at that point? Like, hey, you know what, there's this whole universe of things that are low, no code, and you know what? Or did all of these realizations just come from connecting the dots between your HubSpot experience and then your experience in being kind of like almost a one-man band trying to use Retool, and you just naturally saw that progression without being influenced?
It was sort of natural. The engineer in me liked the idea, and I started tinkering with it. You know, I'll be honest, we didn't explore many other options beyond Retool, and obviously now that I'm in the space, I know there's hundreds of Retool competitors that do elements of what I'm talking about as well, you know. But we started looking at it, and then truthfully, we had this idea, and then we went down a completely wrong path. We looked at the no-code options, and we evaluated that there was like two big players. There was Bubble, which allows you to kind of do everything that you want, and then there was kind of but it was like super hard to use. And then there was Webflow, which is basically just for building websites, but it has a beautiful interface and it allows you to kind of get really granular in the design. And throwing a lot of what I just said previously away, we ended up kind of trying to build a better Bubble, is kind of what we dubbed it for a very long time. But, you know, that has its issues. Well, it's just a very big task to do, right? So we eventually ended up rolling back towards what I described previously, which is where it's data driven more than anything.
I mean, to me, it feels like, from my experience with Noloco, it has evolved into a better Webflow. I had a little bit of back and forth with Bubble. I respect it as a tool, but yeah. I think if I had a choice, I would probably use Webflow. Now, of course, a lot has happened between Noloco's like beginning and where it is right now. And sort of in the last 10 months, we had Simon, your co-founder, exit. And I sort of like was pondering on that, and I wanted to see what was your take on like building a team, especially in a startup environment, and what have you learned so far from early Noloco, Simon leaving, and now? What is the feeling that you have? Yeah. How do you feel like you've matured as a leader going through all of that?
Sure. Yeah. So for context, I mean, Simon was the CEO and I was the CTO. So, he left, as you said, about 10 months ago for personal reasons, which meant I had basically two choices. I either throw everything that I worked on for the last 2 years away and disappoint you, Alex, and everybody else over the last 2 years, or plow on and figure it out. So I chose the latter option of plowing on, which it took a lot of mental energy and a lot of learning. I hadn't really much experience growing or leading a team before as the primary leader. I led the engineering team at Noloco, but it was a small team of kind of 4 to 5 engineers at any given time, and I had to figure out how to manage the non-engineers on the team as well, and then obviously switch gears from doing product-y kind of engineering things every day to actually growing a business, actually doing sales, actually managing the partners that we're working with, figuring out what accounts need to be returned or who our accountant is, that sort of thing. So yeah, there was a lot of changes in that period. I'm still figuring a lot of it out, which is the truth, but I think that's always going to be the case. But the first few months were certainly figuring a lot of things out. The main takeaways I'd say is growing a team is hard, keeping everyone happy, particularly in a startup where there's lots of challenges. Your CEO has just left. You obviously have to, first objective is to fill everyone else with confidence.
Do you feel like you're the CEO, or do you feel like your CTO filling out CEO's duties?
That's a great question. I think I do feel like a CEO. I've really put my engineering cap down, as much as I hate to say that. I don't do as much programming as I used to, but not even half as much.
Is it how much you used to, or how much you would like to?
It's nowhere near how much I used to do. Okay. I would love to do a lot more still, genuinely. Okay. And sometimes I do, but particularly on the weekends I treat myself. But no, I feel like the CEO, the team, it was great. When I heard the news that Simon was leaving, the first thing I had to do was instill the confidence of the team that, it was still worth, doing the hard work, and that the product was great and that the team was great, the remaining team. And I just had to figure out how to go from there, and we've grown the team a bit more. We've kind of shuffled around some roles, and more importantly, we've grown the company. Business is better than ever, and we got out of a kind of a slump that we were in, and we're doing great.
Good. So it feels like you've basically, recovered from a lot of challenges, and right now, just recently you've launched a big overhaul of the builder and the user experience of building a Noloco portal. The issues that existed before, small bugs here and there, everything's okay. Then Simon left, and it feels like you are kind of in your stride. I feel. Do you feel like you will eventually want to grow the engineering team even more? I get a CTO, or do you feel like, for the foreseeable, I'm going to be this hybrid, kind of like Elon Musk, CEO and chief engineer as well?
Yeah, that's something I think about a lot. The commercial side is something I've gotten better at for sure, but it's definitely not where my strengths are, right? So going forward, I definitely need to grow the engineering team. We feature requests each and every day. The list is hundreds long at this point. The high priority ones and they're really great. They're really things that can make a big difference to our product. So we certainly are going to be growing the engineering team in the coming months. To manage that, I think getting more experienced engineers in the door will help with that. I can't kind of juggle the commercial and the engineering side much longer. So it might be the case that I get someone to kind of focus on the commercial side of things, that is like sales and marketing, while I focus on kind of the leading the product, leading the engineers. I think that would probably be where my strengths lie best. As much as I do enjoy some of the sales calls, it's definitely not where my strengths lie.
I see. Well, okay. Let's kind of switch gears. This is an interesting little question that I'm really interested to see what your answer is to this. In the last 2 years, a lot has happened with Noloco, but outside of Noloco, we've had, of course, AI, and generally it feels like we're accelerating towards, more sophisticated low-code tools. And generally, the relationship between tech and humans seems to have been kind of verging closer and closer and closer into being completely seamless. Now, where do you see this relationship going? And especially regarding no-code tools, where does Noloco play a role in that blurring of the line between humans, technology, AI? What's your take on that?
Yeah, I get asked this every now and again. Is no-code going to go away when AI gets good enough, or has it got a place? And I think yes. I think more than ever, it's going to be important. If you take a step back, the goal of AI should at least be to kind of make it easier for humans to do their work, right? And at the end of the day, that's exactly what no code promises to do. It allows people to work more flexibly, to quickly learn things they otherwise couldn't, to quickly do things they otherwise couldn't, which is, as I said, the same promise of no code. So what I see is, I don't think people are going to be writing custom prompts that will build apps from scratch, because at the end of the day, where do you deploy them? How do you maintain them? How do you make sure it scales, or how do you change it, right? Unless the AI gets it perfect, that's out of reach to the people we're targeting, right? The customers of ours. Unless it spits out exactly what they're looking to do, that's out of reach, right? So the way I'm looking at it is that AI is going to supplement no-code builders like Noloco a lot. So that instead of pointing and clicking to add your database field, you're going to say, look, I've got, it's going to know that you have a table of, say, customers and accounts. And you now say, I want to add a customer support element to this app. And it'll spin up tickets, and it'll say, how many stages do you want your tickets to have? What's the ticket pipeline like? And you'll say, oh, it'll have, pending, in review solved, right? And it'll just walk you through this like a wizard, but in a chat interface. And we've already experimented with this, and it's super possible to do. Just getting the interface correct.
Vectorizing a lot of the data that you have, basically. And
but
honestly,
it doesn't
text
even need to. It doesn't, we don't need to do any special training is the reality of it. I mean, I'd like to say that we have all this proprietary tech, and we will, But even just messing around with ChatGPT, giving it the right prompts, I've been able to get it to produce what we would need to do this sort of AI building. As you know, we already have the AI prompt builder to build the first version of your app, but we plan to take it a lot further, where you're able to, add additional things to your apps.
Yeah, that would be.
And I think that's where it's going to be, because like I'm on the tail end of support basically most of my day, and most of the questions aren't about features. People know we have the features. They're about how do they do it within the context of their app. And that's what AI is very easy they're very good at solving, right? Because when I get a question, I have to open up someone's app or open it up in our support tools. Take 5 to 10 minutes to figure out the context of what they're talking about. Okay, they've got a project, say, with links to clients, and they have tasks, and some of those tasks have invoices. And, you're kind of like, okay, but it's actually in French. So that's like way more confusing because I don't really speak French. And then you have to give an answer. AI can just do that, even in French, right? They can do that in seconds, and they can give a better answer. And if it's wrong, you can just say, well, actually, that wasn't what I was looking for. You know what I mean? Which is the same conversation I would have with a customer.
From a flip side perspective, though, what about the engineering teams inside of Noloco? I mean, you can speak to that, but from a general perspective, a lot of what AI is kind of like really, really good at is the coding of things. Do you think that now with this, we are going to see a more accelerated pace of development of new features? Noloco first and maybe industry second. Do you feel like that's a thing?
I think so. Like, some of our engineers are using things like Copilot. It makes a huge difference. It's shockingly good at picking up the context of what you're trying to write, but it's also only as good as the engineers. So if you were to give it to a brand new engineer or someone who doesn't know how to code at all, it's not going to code for them, right?
Yeah.
But it does mean that maybe a standard engineer is perhaps the quality of a very good engineer now, or a very good engineer is maybe even twice as good, We're seeing that again. And it does mean features get shipped a bit faster, particularly if you have the frameworks to kind of test and verify that what the code has been written does what it says it does,
So, okay, basically you feel like it's being used, it's being adopted by engineering teams, but it's not like the status quo that, well, obviously, we use AI to cross-check our work, to write new code, check that, or maybe even use AI in terms of troubleshooting. So I understand where you're kind of coming from, and I feel like it's a similar case in end users as well, where AI is being used to speed things up, but not like the de facto default way that we do something.
Yeah.
Okay.
The troubleshooting one, though, is a really good point to touch on. Like, previously when you get an error when you're programming, you'd Google it in hopes that someone has posted that error on Stack Overflow and that they provided the correct follow-up steps, and that you're running the same version as them and so on. These days, you throw it into ChatGPT and more often than not, it gives you the right answer straight away, or you prod it the right way that you normally would if you were talking to someone else that knows what they're talking about. It's been great it's absolutely wonderful at things like that, and again, that speeds up the development. It's not producing the code per se, but it's not slowing you down. It's unblocking you, right?
I fully agree. Like, there's nothing to add to that. I'm looking forward to bigger context windows, especially like in the millions of tokens. Hopefully that can allow things like video being processed instead of, thousands and thousands of frames. You just process them and you basically get like a movie as a context window, and then you can ask ChatGPT, questions about the movie that it has just seen. I mean, that's kind of like what I'm looking for. It's probably a bit novel, at least for our kinds of projects, but it's something that I'm kind of looking forward to. In terms of society and the impact that no code has, where do you feel that Noloco is kind of like moving towards? Are you like, for instance, a believer in the citizen developer, where essentially, at least in my mind, that is concept of anybody can be a developer? Or do you feel like not everybody can be a developer, but we're trying to support people by making it as easy as possible?
Again, great question. I don't like the word citizen developer. I don't even like the word no code. I think it's backing up the wrong tree, I think ultimately the goal of platforms like Noloco or Airtable or any of those really is to provide better tooling, business optimization. That's a buzzword in and of itself, but at the end of the day, that's all we're trying to do. Make it easier to run your business, make it feel like there's less constraints, right? So what we specialize in, when you boil it down, is giving people very custom tools where they otherwise are kind of using either tools that are way too broad, like a spreadsheet, or they're using tools that are way too specific, like a very specific CRM that doesn't quite do everything they want it to do, like a real estate specific CRM that does most of what they want, except that their real estate company is ever so slightly different, so it doesn't work the way that app intended it to work. So you then have people resorting back to, like, say, spreadsheets. So I think truly, more and more platforms are going to become, or the next generation of platforms like Noloco are going to be customizable down to every single little, button and UI element. That's pretty much what we're hoping to do, so that the guardrails of the kind of vertical SaaS, like that real estate CRM that I mentioned, are completely removed, and you get somewhere between that blank spreadsheet and that custom or specific CRM, right? And you get something that's tailored to you. I don't think everybody's going to need to be a citizen developer per se. I think it might still be localized to the IT departments or the people driven enough to solve it. In the same way that, like, if you take any modern company, there's always that Excel wizard, that one person that everybody goes to that has all the Excel formulas, and they're the only ones that understand how to work it, right? They're the ones that are just driven to solve the problem. They figured out a solution. Excel is still available to everybody, but they're using it in its kind of most basic form. They're not pushing its kind of boundaries. And I think even that's what we see. We see, within customers of ours, there's one or two people who have just gone above and beyond, and they spend like 12 hours a day in the Noloco builder, right? And then there's other people on their team have just made a few updates, and they get it, they understand why it's useful, they just don't have all the context. I guess solving that would be an interesting problem.
In the same vein, something comes to mind. I was working in a past life with a business ERP integrator. Basically, he's like a consultant, and he helps you move from one ERP to the next. And I asked him a question saying, look, do you feel like tech jobs are gonna go away? Do you feel like we're gonna lose our jobs at some point? And he gave me this very interesting response. Like, in the 50s, you would have, father and son work on a car. They would change the oil. They would tinker with the filters. They would actively engage in fixing said car. Nowadays, it's not so much. So young people have kind of shifted away from that. And he said, well, it's the same thing with IT. My question to you is, do you feel like that is a thing as well with Noloco? Or in your time building Noloco, have you seen a shift of a generation moving towards doing less and expecting more? Or maybe tinkering less? Is that a thing that you noticed at all?
I don't know if that's the case. I think, when it comes to businesses, and again, that's what we're building. We're building tools that make people's businesses better. If they can see the results, if they can see that, hey, look, if I tinker this little bit, it'll be more productive, will be more operationally efficient, people will do that. The very fact that, say, Zapier exists or Make proves that people have been doing this for the last 10, 15 years, and they need to. They have these distinct systems that need to work together, and the more you tinker, the less you have to manually copy and paste them. I haven't seen any shifts really. I can see where you're going from for sure, but I think that's kind of where that Web 2.0 phase, where everything was kind of handed to you as in, here is the software. And I think we're moving towards here is the software that you can customize. And I think that's where we're going.
I mean, it kind of ties
I'd like to call it Web 3, but
Web 3.
Someone else took that name.
I mean, kind of on the same wavelength of generational shifts and long-term thinking. What would you like, again, thinking long-term, what would you like the legacy of Noloco to be? Maybe 10 years from now? It's a heavy word, and probably, especially for someone who's so involved, you maybe don't have the luxury of time to think. But is there something that you would want to call your legacy in terms of like the product in 10 years time?
I think there's so many ways it could go, but one thing that always interests me is occasionally we get customers moving to us from something like Salesforce. And that really interests me because Salesforce is this behemoth. They've just got customers by the neck almost. Once you're in, it's so hard to get out. So I think Noloco has a lot of similarities. Like at the end of the day, Salesforce is this very customizable database with hundreds of thousands of plugins to basically everything else your enterprise could need. And I personally think Noloco is a modern version of that. It's a very customizable database with a very flexible interface, more so than what Salesforce offered. And if we continue down that path, there's no reason why we couldn't become as big or as relevant as Salesforce. I think that's very interesting to me. I don't know if that's a legacy or if even that's something you'd want to have as your legacy, but that's certainly where the vision could go.
I mean, some low-code tools, I guess, position themselves as the harbinger of the future of work. Do you feel like that resonates, like the future of work or the platform for the future of work? Do you feel like that's something that Noloco is going to as a vision? Or are we talking about scale? I mean, like Zapier recently, they were a automation tool for so many years, just like flat automation, not expensive, but at the same time integrates natively out of the box with a bunch of different services. But recently, they're diversifying into having their own tables. They're allowing you to create pages, creating portals. Now they're going into chatbots. So they're kind of like opening up that horizon and I guess changing their identity. Do you feel like Noloco's identity can change, and where do you feel like it might go in the next few years?
Yeah, the future of work, I mean, I don't know if that's fair given I think it's the current state of work is where you should be. I think framing it as the future is more like, well, this is where it will be. But in reality, we have, hundreds of customers that are using Noloco for their work, and it's a better way for them, for sure. Could we eventually kind of rebrand in a similar way to Zapier have? It's hard to say. I think we do so much already. I think Zapier, we're very focused on automations. I think we have automations, we have a database, we have an interface. I think integrations is probably where we would go in terms of going that same way that, say, Zapier had, but they started that way. We're probably going to end up more that way so that Noloco can fit into more and more different places. But then further to that, there's so many options of adding things like modules where, there could be yes, you have a very customizable portal builder, but you have these drop-in modules of built-out functionality. We've already seen this with our comments. That's it. Like, it's something that you could build with no code, but it's better served for something that an engineer has built and designed, right? So you could do that with CRM, you could do that with billing, you could do that with, in email sending. There's lots more modules that could be dropped into an Noloco app that fit into that modular, customizable builder, which would again expand the definition of what we do.
I see. Okay. Well, I think you've kind of covered for me. That's basically it. I don't have anything else, at least for now, to ask. Like I said, I mean, I'm super grateful for the opportunity. Thank you so much for the time. We've been through thick and thin, I guess, with a lot of our clients using Noloco. Simon, introducing me. Then I was like, say no. And then I was like, well, what is this platform? I feel like we've got a lot of history, and it's been a privilege to talk to you now.
Oh, thank you.
And that's it from me. Do you have any questions for me?
Do I have any questions for you? I suppose, yeah, I do actually. So, you work as a partner with Noloco, obviously, which means you employ more people than we do to work on Noloco and on other platforms. Where do you see this all going, and what's your plans for Sonorus?
Where do I see Sonorus going, or the industry?
Industry first, and then how is Sonorus going to play into it?
In terms of the industry, I feel like we are moving towards the ability to have a lot of features which are handed to you too easily And it's really easy for platforms to go Android versus Apple. Android, tons of functionality. If you know what you're doing, you're great. Apple typically waits and cherry picks the features and polishes the hell out of it. So I feel like right now we see a lot of platforms in the industry like Noloco. I mean, not saying that Noloco is one of those platforms, really struggle to deliver enough well. They either do everything in a kind of like janky way that is really hard to adopt as a user, or they are too simplistic with their offering. That goes for database builders and front ends. I also feel like clients are changing. Clients used to, I feel, want to tinker more. I mean, it has slightly flipped into an interesting little way with ChatGPT, where prior to ChatGPT, it was a clear trend from, at least for me, since 2017 towards like, we tinker, and then we kind of like stop tinkering because business evolved in such a way during that period where you don't have enough time. We were experiencing global growth during 17, 18, 19, 20, up till 20 before Corona. After that, Corona hit and people decided that, you know what, let me learn a skill. So they started tinkering again. So it was like, I'm not gonna tinker, let me pick up a new hobby. Then ChatGPT hit again, and I feel like 2 years since Corona, and I feel like we are back into, okay, I'm not really going to tinker because the stuff that ChatGPT gives me, I'm trying it, it doesn't work. And they kind of realize that they need developers. Chances are, you know, if you were patient enough as a client, you would probably get there, especially with no code. That's the state of play with the current situation for platforms and clients alike. Now, for Sonorus, main problem always has been we have a lot of work, not enough engineers. Hopefully this year, by the end of 2024, we should have at least 3 new people on the team, which would give us a decent boost in capacity. That probably will mean that we need to also hire admin staff, also PM staff. Just because you have capacity, that doesn't mean that, I like the saying, you know, no code doesn't mean no responsibility. No code means responsibility, and capacity also means responsibility, not just from delivering the work, but making sure that your clients are supported 360 degrees from a PM standpoint, making sure that everybody's on the same page about a given project, and also from a finance standpoint, are you up to date with your bills and such? So that's where we are. Do I feel like we have enough on our plate in terms of platforms? Do I feel like we need to go anywhere else and like diversify? Not really. We have so much work. Noloco with Airtable, that whole stack is just growing immensely right now. Yeah. And even Noloco, I can see from our marketing, Noloco as a keyword is on an upward the last maybe 2 years, kind of like Corona time, it's on an upward. So there's so much work right now. Like I said, people are kind of stopping the tinkering, and they want to put their trust in developers, good developers who can speak great English, who can understand their business requirements. I also see a bit of laziness in the sense that sometimes they over-trust ChatGPT in terms of giving us the right requirements, but copy-pasting them from ChatGPT without really knowing what it is that they are writing to us in an email. And then you start asking questions and you can tell that they're not super sure what an API is. They might say, I just wanted to have an API. What do you want to do with the API? I just wanted to have an API. So yeah, it's an interesting time. Hopefully that covers your question.
Oh, complete. More than enough. Yeah. Great stuff. Great to hear you're growing so well.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah. Well, Darragh, it's been a pleasure. Thank you ever so much. And thanks, dude.
Brilliant. Thanks, Alex.
Catch you later.
Yeah.